Hello, this is the third episode of Crypto Choreo podcast, and today I'm very happy to have TN, the CEO and founder of Pendle, with me. Hello, TN.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. It's
It's
a
great
pleasure to
have
be here.
great having you. Thanks a lot, sir. So Pendle has been all over, the social media, a lot of success in different metrics. So I'm very happy to deep dive about Pendle today with you and about the LSD narrative, which is one of the fastest growing narratives. But let's start with yourself. Can you tell us about your background and how you came to DeFi and then started Pendle?
Yeah, sure. For me, I got involved in crypto first and foremost when I was still a student. And I was doing a research project for a professor, and I was tasked to look into different fintech business models. And I came across one that utilized Bitcoin for remittance. So that was, I think, the first encounter that I had with something called Bitcoin, and it got me interested in the technology behind it. And then I got more involved in the tech itself through just managing communities for Ethereum unofficially, but learned a lot more about the technology. So fast forward a couple of years, I got to know Loy, who's the founder of Kyber, and we became friends. And when he started Kyber, I joined as one of the founding team members and built out the business development side and the community side for Kyber. Now, so my background in crypto started professionally in 2017 along with Kyber, and I stayed on until the earlier part of 2019. So after that, I gathered a group of people who are also co-founders of Pendle to work on a string of unsuccessful ventures in and out of crypto. So we explored mining. So we developed mining software. We also explored data ETL. So basically developing ETL pipelines for various projects. That had a bit more successes compared to the other ventures that we did. It also set a very good foundation for us to think about how to approach product design subsequently, because this was immediately before the launch of Pendle. So yeah, for me, I've been in crypto for quite some time, and yeah, fortunately for me, I've always been in DeFi. So I am as crypto native as anyone can be.
That's great. That's a lot of experience from 2017 being in DeFi, and Kyber was actually also pretty early in the DeFi space in terms of DEXs. And so there is certainly a lot of experience here. Um, so let's talk about LSTs. It's now the biggest sector by TVL for now, surpassing DEXs and lending and borrowing in 2023. Um, how do you see the development here? I see a lot of new protocols coming, especially on the stablecoin LSD, like Libra, Raft, Gravita, Prisma. What kind of innovations do you see in the LSD sector?
I mean, this is perhaps my own opinion. I think right now we can probably classify the entire LSD sector into multiple segments. So there is the CDP, which is where Libra and then Prisma, Raft, they operate in. So you deposit and ETH LSD to mint stablecoin, and then the stablecoin can be utilized somewhere else. And then there's something like an ETF, like Unsheath. So it represents a collection of various different forms of ETH LSDs. And then there's yield trading protocol like us. And then I think the most vanilla kind is probably money market. So ETH LSDs can be deposited into money markets for as collateral, and then borrow some other assets to use somewhere else. So I think my perspective is now we're seeing, especially with the first two categories that I've mentioned, right, the CDP and also the ETF equivalent. I think over time they are probably going to converge because I mean, the way I look at it, it makes a lot of sense to actually use, say, STETH or RETH, Anchor ETH, as a form of collateral to mint stablecoin. And I'm also of the opinion that, and I think it's already happening, Libra is going to start to take in more different forms of ETH LSDs as collaterals. So I think in time to come, we should see convergence on that front and then consolidation. And yeah, but in general, I'm very hopeful that the TVL will continue to go up because it is, yeah, it is more efficient uh, to use um, LSDs for other purposes.
Absolutely. I also think that the LST narrative is a very long lasting, and it's not just based on some hype or some catalyst, short term catalyst. And because it's, as you said, it's really convenient. A lot of people are bullish on Ethereum, and it's really convenient to get some kind of yield through staking on Ethereum.
Mm.
And LST allows you to do that. And then because we have all these TVL and liquid tokens, then what can we do around it? So there are all these new protocols that are coming, etc. Uh, can you tell me about like how do you see the development of LSTs in the next maybe 5 years? I know that this year was really spectacular growth, and we have a lot of new things, innovations, etc. What do you see as more long-lasting kind of ideas, and some more maybe based on hype?
Yeah, so in my opinion, I think for context, right, I do believe that the LSD narrative will continue to sustain for a while, and it's good for Pendle. So the reason why I think it will sustain is because, uh, like we just mentioned earlier, it's more efficient, and there is a growing confidence that ETH staking yield is becoming some sort of a reference rate for traders. So currently, like the staking yield is probably around 4 to 5%, and this is, I guess, as close to a risk-free rate as it is within crypto. So the way I see it, like at least how we're looking at it, is we are currently structuring pools for STETH across multiple maturities, because from a perspective of a yield trading protocol, we think that having that yield curve that represents yeah just uh, points like different like the APY across like multiple different maturities could function as a very good benchmark for traders. So in this case, we have 2023 pool, 2024, 2025, 2027, and with deep liquidity, I think we should be able to have a more holistic view of the view of staking yield, yeah, through all these different pools. Hopefully, I think with the construct of this yield curve, we can push for a new kind of narrative, and we can bring about more interest from the institutions to, yeah, trade the yield and through Pendle.
So that's a great introduction about Pendle. Now let's deep dive in Pendle. One of the things that I hear on Twitter is about Pendle is that Pendle is a bit complex. So maybe this is because Pendle did a pivot at some time, and some of the ideas have more complexity. But I would like you to let's do kind of a ChatGPT kind of prompt exercise in 2 steps. Can you explain what Pendle does for a 10-year-old?
Pendle is a protocol that that allows the tokenization and the trading of yield. So to extend on that part, our thesis here is that yield is probably some of the biggest components and features of DeFi, because like APY, APRs everywhere. And our perspective is that like all these APYs could and will be tokenized. And as long as they're tokenized, they can be traded. So the use cases that we are facilitating is are first and foremost like allowing the fixed rates to take place. So, like for example, if you have position elsewhere and you want to hedge just as a form of protection, then Pendle can be a venue. And of course, the other side is that if you have a view on a yield of certain asset and you want to express a view there, Pendle is the venue for it.
So, about the complexity of Pendle, do you think that this complexity makes it more convenient for institutionals and funds to use Pendle compared to maybe retail investors who usually have less sophisticated strategies? And is this an approach that you have taken in your go-to-market strategy?
Right. So I think by design, Pendle, because it's a yield derivative, it will be, it is going to be complex. So what we can do on our end, and we have attempted, is to reduce the barrier for participation to cater to a wider range of audience. So with the launch of V2, actually we have incorporated two different interfaces. We have the simple UI and we have the pro UI. So the simple UI is there to abstract away the complexities, and the pro UI has a lot more elements that are native to like yield trading. So if you are more advanced and you have better appreciation for derivatives, then the pro UI is probably something for you. Now we think that it is important to have two sides because on the one hand, we need to aggregate interests from the retail users by positioning Pendle as or structuring Pendle to cater to certain needs of retail. And then we also need the more advanced traders, probably from the institutions, to take the other side. So just to give you an example, the simple UI is there to aggregate interest from retail. So what happens at the back of simple UI is basically the buying of PT. So because PT is inversely related to YT, if we build up enough demand for PT, which is the fixed rate component, then it could create more interesting opportunities for the YT side, which is where like the yield speculation can take place. So these relationships are very dynamic and they are also very interdependent of each other. So moving forward, we will continue to invest resources in developing the demand for the PT side, and then we will also have trading mechanics, maybe automated and optimized around certain strategies to ensure that the trading activities can take place smoothly.
Just for those who don't know, Pendle actually divides a yield-bearing assets in two parts, and one is the YT, which is the yield token, and then the other part is the principal token, the PT. Now, I was checking this morning on Lido, and Lido offers 3.9% APR for staking ETH. Pendle has three pools with different maturities, with different APYs. I think around 8, 10, and 12. And so that's a lot of boost. How is this achieved, and how can we go from something like 4% to 12%?
Yeah, so I think that 12% is more of the liquidity provision APY. So it is because Pendle ultimately is an AMM. So when user deposit funds or assets into the pool, users are entitled to Pendle rewards and also the swap fees. Now, I just want to add there, right? Because one of the more interesting innovations that we've introduced to Pendle V2 is to allow for the AMM to stack up yield. Now, so of course, like the by becoming a liquidity provider, the Pendle incentives is part of the APY. But because of the way we structure the AMM, underlying reward in the form of STETH coming from Lido also constitutes to that 12% APY that you're seeing on the dashboard. So STETH is an example. I think another interesting example is Stargate USDT. So, for example, a user deposits Stargate USDT into Pendle. The user is entitled to Pendle rewards, the swap fees in the pool. So, part of that goes to the liquidity provider. And on top of that, they are also entitled to lending APY from Stargate and STG reward that is paid out from Stargate. So collectively, these are the four different sources of revenue that makes it more enticing from an APY perspective and allowed us to attract more liquidity to the protocol.
Absolutely. So you're trying to optimize yield from whatever, wherever you can, and on top of that, add your own rewards and optimizations in terms of liquidity to provide such APYs. Now,
Correct.
one of the questions that people also have about Pendle is about these maturity dates. Um, Again, taking example of the staked ETH from Lido, can you elaborate a bit about how these maturity dates are set? What are some of the considerations that you have when you set these dates and how they relate to the APY?
So the maturity dates, I think the context for it is quite similar to what we were talking about. Like we see that there is a growing confidence in ETH staking APY as the risk free rate. So we think it would make sense for us to double down efforts into concentrating liquidity from on like across the STETH pools. We started with a 2023 pool last year when we launched Pendle V2. And then over time, we saw that the pool has attracted a good amount of liquidity naturally, even with relatively low incentives. So we introduced like more pools, but we try to match the maturity of these pools to other instruments. Because, for example, if we set maturity December next year, chances are we could allow for a trader to utilize multiple positions for various strategies. So, say they use Deribit on the one hand, and then they can also combine it with Pendle to maybe establish some positions for their strategies to maximize their earnings. So we try to match that to larger venues. We match the maturities on Pendle to larger venues, largely to allow users to capitalize on these different venues for their strategies. And then with regards to the longer dated ones, I think the one of the narratives that we're pushing forward over the next couple of months is the yield curve. I mentioned that yield curve is actually one of the most important tool for traders because it functions as a reference rate. So having that various maturities with sufficiently deep liquidity is more representative of a view.
So for people who might be less familiar, so you can trade options and perpetual futures in crypto, and usually, well, if it's not perpetual, for example, options you mentioned there a bit, you have actually there is a kind of a expiry date, and so what Pendle allows to do with this maturity date is to look at what's on these options trading and what are the some of the expiry dates, and then have kind of similar dates in terms of maturity so that people, if they go short there, they can go long on Pendle kind of with APYs from pools so that they can actually build maybe hedge positions or delta neutral positions for more sophisticated users. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is a very good summary.
Perfect. One of the things that I've seen in the selling points of Pendle V2 compared to V1 is actually that there is negligible impermanent loss. Uh,
Mm.
Now, you said that Pendle basically is an AMM. Is this coming from kind of a better model of AMM? Is this similar to the Uniswap V3 concentrated liquidity?
Sure. So it's not quite a Uniswap V3, even though there are borrowed elements like inspired by Uniswap V3. So for one, Pendle AMM is more capital efficient because of concentrated liquidity. So when a user, like say, when we set up a pool, we have to indicate the range to concentrate the liquidity at. So yeah, most of the trades will go through the range. So that's one. With regards to impermanent loss, because like when we operate a Pendle V1, impermanent loss is actually one of the most significant considerations for liquidity providers. And typically, in order to attract liquidity, in the presence of impermanent loss, we have to compensate a lot, say with tokens. So as a result of that, it could incur more selling pressure on the token, and then it would also make the APY lower because if the selling pressure is very drastic, yeah, it just makes the price of the token goes down, and then the APY goes down as well. Then you have to incentivize more tokens in quantity. So when we were thinking about Pendle V2 design for the AMM, right, we decided that impermanent loss is something that we have to improve on. So the way we improve on the impermanent loss is to pair the two assets in the pool to be so for these two assets in the same pool to be highly correlated. So as an example of a pool with highly correlated assets, it would be say USDC and USDT, because structurally these two assets are denominated in say USD, and their values are kind of pegged to one like US dollar. So they cannot be too far off. Sometimes you could see like 98 cents to like say, yeah, the exchange rate could vary slightly, right? But it's never like 50 cents or 10 cents to a dollar. So with the Pendle AMM, it's somewhat similar in the design. So we have the underlying paired with its principal token, because principal token is a derivative of the underlying. So by design, it is very highly correlated to the underlying. So PT and underlying very highly correlated, and because they're so highly correlated, the so the price movements would be much more paralleled. So yeah, that's an important factor of consideration. So importantly, right, because Pendle's PT is redeemable for the underlying one-to-one at maturity. At maturity, PT is effectively the underlying, because it's going to be one-to-one in value. So at maturity, like for example, if you're a liquidity provider and you deposit asset into Pendle into Pendle pool, and you hold it until maturity, there's no impermanent loss because the PT would have appreciated to the value of the underlying, and effectively the assets in the pool have the same value.
Yeah. So in the worst case scenario, the APY and the yield that you get will compensate any impermanent loss that you would have.
Yes. So of course, like if you withdraw, yeah. So I was just going to add on, like if you withdraw the assets from the LP pool anytime before the maturity, there could be impermanent loss. But if you hold it until maturity, there's no impermanent loss.
Let me ask you a last, maybe technical question, and then we can move on to the Pendle a bit more, the success of Pendle and more business related stuff. You have this actually thing on your website, which is buy assets at a discount. And so, for
Yeah.
example, you can buy USDT through Stargate, I think, at Pendle on at 0.90 at 97 cents actually for a 3.5 discounts. How does that work?
Yes. So because Pendle tokenizes the yield bearing asset into PT and YT, the yield accrued will actually go to the YT. So using the Stargate USDT, for example, Stargate USDT is a form of yield bearing asset because the holding, like the way to get Stargate USDT is to deposit USDT into Stargate In exchange, you get Stargate USDT. So there are two purposes for this Stargate USDT. One is it functions as a proof of your deposit into the pool, and secondly, it functions as a receipt of the. It's like a voucher for the future stream of APY coming from the underlying protocol. So Pendle splits up these two functionalities and represent them in two separate tokens in the form of PT and YT. So the APY goes to the YT, and then the underlying in itself um, is represented in the form of PT. So here there is a very important rule that is relevant for Pendle, which is one underlying is equal to the value of one PT plus one YT. So at any one point in time, one PT plus one YT has to equal to the underlying. And because of these relationships, right? If you can determine two out of the three different components, you can determine like if you have two out of the three components, you can determine the third because it's just addition and subtraction. So yeah, with regards to the question about how the asset can be purchased as at a discount, because of that relationship, right? Underlying, let's just say, is one ether. If yeah, so we'll use ether as an example. YT is probably like zero point 0.1 ether, and then the remaining PT will be zero point 0.9 ether because one PT, which is zero point 0.9, plus one YT, which is zero point 0.1 ether, has to equal to one ether. So, uh, so structurally, I'd say I think the way to understand PT is like zero coupon bond. So all the yield goes to the YT side, and then the PT has to be sold at a discount. And as long as it's held to maturity, it can be used to redeem for underlying one to one.
Very good. So let's talk about the Pendle success. Although we are still, maybe we have been in a bear market in part of 2023, Pendle has been very, very strong in very different metrics from the TVL, token price appreciation, the social metrics. So we can really talk about a very clear outperformance of the market, not just doing well, but really outperforming most of the tokens. In your own words, to what would you contribute this success?
I think we have, so we've been around since 2021. The first implementation happened in June 2021. We've actually had a lot of time to prepare for the launch of V2. So after the first implementation in 2021, for a greater part of 2022, we were just reviewing the product, observe how people use our product, and then incorporated the learnings into the design of V2, which is why I think we have so much to share in the previous segment about the technicalities and the improvements on Pendle AMM. So, so we have prepared for a long time for the product and explored different types of use cases for the Pendle AMM and also yield trading. But I think the other element that is also very important that we cannot ignore is like we're very, very fortunate, very lucky to be able to ride on the LSD wave. Because when we started out, I think the whole concept of yield trading is still very foreign to the crypto community. But over time, as we explore different use cases and different ways to generate wealth using Pendle, we started to see, more adoption, and then we started to also associate ourselves with LSD because there is a growing confidence, right, in ETH staking yield as the benchmark rate. So anchoring the whole concept of yield trading to yield from ETH staking makes a lot of sense, and then people start to see the relationship between us, like Pendle, and ETH staking yield. That's kind of how I think we got our first breakthrough. And of course, I think we have also gotten a lot of help and support from other projects who believe in our vision. So, for example, like Stargate is one of them. They help with the proposal to seed liquidity into the USDT pool on Pendle. And then, not forgetting, we also got a lot of traction from the co-announcements with Aura, Balancer, and Rocket Pool back in January. So all of these partnerships gave us more visibility, and as a result, we saw more traction.
So to summarize, building quietly during a bear market and learning the lessons of the V1, riding maybe the LSD narrative, and lastly, a lot of partnerships and collaborations with other protocols. Very good. Now, I would like to know, in terms, Pendle has done almost 20x in 2023, going from 5 cents almost to $1. I would like to know, how does this price appreciation correlate with kind of business metrics in terms of TVL or user growth or more users? Is there a direct correlation or not necessarily?
Not necessarily, but I think it helps and it reinforces our metrics because when we started out, we haven't placed a lot of emphasis on the price of the token. But as the token appreciates in value, it's given us more visibility, and as a result, more adoption. And then the cycle kind of just reinforces itself. So I'd say like having token, if managed properly with utility, can be a very very good tool to just grow the product. So for us, initially, it was much more difficult because the token price was very low, and I don't think there's a lot of confidence in the protocol. So what we had to do is really to grow the product adoption organically by exploring partnerships and also doing very hands-on approaches, speaking with the institutions and get them to explore yield opportunities on Pendle, starting with something as simple as providing liquidity in exchange for some APY on Pendle. And then over time, I think it helps to with the appreciation of the token, right? It certainly helps with our case. Now we have to sustain it, and then we have to look at different ways to grow the protocol even more.
It seems that it's really a flywheel that could be either negative or positive with the price and actually the business metrics, where if the price of the token is going up, then more people will start looking at the protocol. What is this project? What is it doing? Some part of these people will start using the protocol and then, create this positive feedback loop.
Yes.
Now, for other protocols and other projects, what would you say are the takeaways? Because you launched in 2021, you had your V1, uh, and now the V2 is much more successful in any kind of metrics. What are the takeaways from V1 that made you so successful now in V2 that other protocols could benefit, other than the technicalities?
I think having a clear focus in objective is very important. For us, the primary metrics have been TVL and trading volume because these are the revenue drivers for our protocol. And from there on, we can actually prioritize activities and features that would benefit the two metrics directly. So anything that maybe stray us away from our objectives, we can very safely disregard. So I think, yeah, just think about the core metrics and then focus on these core metrics. Other than that, community building is actually a lot of experiments. So I would say we've had some successes with the community building in the first half of this year, but it's not easy. And because the space changes so rapidly in such a short span of time, so we have, in order for us to stay relevant, we have to continue to explore different narratives. Just to give you an example, before people know us, as an LSD product, we've experimented with a number of different narratives. So we seeded narratives like the association with ApeCoin, because we launched an ApeCoin compounder last year, end of last year, to capitalize on the ApeCoin hype. We also explored, because we were very low cap, so toying around with the idea of low cap gem, right? Because we're like literally like $10 million in FDV. The other ones that probably had more visibility, like more eyeballs, was interest rate swap being a very big market in TradFi, and us building something equivalent and growing the yield trading space within DeFi. So these are narratives that we've experimented, and of course the other one is like asset at a discount. But I think after experimenting with some of these narratives, as expected, most didn't work out. But the ones that worked out, it kind of worked out in a much bigger way than we had anticipated.
Hmm. It's kind of like a trading where you have maybe the win rate doesn't need to be very high, but if you have one win and the risk to reward is very high, where you have little risk of building something. If it doesn't work out, you can always pivot. But if it works out, then then you've made it, kind of,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So this goes back, right? I think the having the mindset to experiment and be open minded about like ideas coming from different sources is actually very important. At least internally, we know that experiments. The way I convey it to the team, like, is that experiment has to take place. It doesn't matter if we fail many times. All we need is just one or two big wins. Then I think it would make all our attempts worthwhile.
You mentioned about narratives. Do you think that all protocols should kind of associate themselves to a kind of trendy hype narrative because that there is more demand, etc., to it, and those who are actually trying to do something maybe very innovative and very different and new, but nobody else is doing it, have less chances of making it?
Yes, I do think the narrative is very important, beyond just having a good product, because this is how people will remember a product. Like, it doesn't matter how good your product is, right? If people are feeling indifferent about your product, then I think it's very hard for you to succeed in a very crowded marketplace. So having an anchor, giving people a reason to remember you, is very important.
So now, recently, there are new protocols that are building on top of Pendle, which this on its own is a kind of success. So I can think of Equilibria, there is PenP, there is TakeDAO. Um, can you elaborate about first how did that come? Did they contacted you? Was there some kind of collaborations on initiative was on their side, or and then what are they trying to do exactly?
So the conversation actually happened with a friend who's yeah, it was a very organic conversations. It wasn't anything like, we've always had the idea of building out an ecosystem, but we just didn't expect it to happen so soon. But conversations led to certain execution. So when we were exchanging ideas with this other friend, he raised the prospect of maybe constructing an ecosystem that could help with the VE Pendle side of things. So we agreed to it. And from there on, he basically introduced us to the teams at Equilibria and PenPy, Staked Out too. And yeah, we were just helping them, because we know that if we are objective and we help them succeed, then we would do well as an ecosystem.
Absolutely. And this actually strengthened the utility of the project and further, make it stronger as not just a single
Yeah,
actor, but multiple actors depending on it. like other
Yeah,
kind of protocols like Uniswap, etc. Which there are a lot of protocols based just on Uniswap, and this is on its own sign of
yeah.
strength.
I want to add that like ecosystem. Sorry, I want to add that like ecosystem expansion is definitely one of the areas of focus for us because um, there are actually various ecosystems that we're currently constructing. So other than the Pendle, we see the we see a lot of potential in PTS collateral. So about 3 weeks ago, Dolomite became the first money market that accepted or like took in Pendle's PT as collateral. So users can deposit PT to borrow Bitcoin or ETH or some other assets that are available on Dolomite. And then 2 weeks ago, TimeSwap did something similar. So we see a lot of potential to push for adoption for PT because PT as collateral kind of makes a lot of sense because it's there is an inherent fixed yield that resides within PT. So using PT as collateral, it should generate more APY for the depositor. So this is an aspect that we're pushing for, and then with regards to our core proposition, right? We have fixed yield product that we can push to centralized exchanges and wallets, get them to integrate Pendle, and through them offer decentralized fixed rates to their user bases. So, for example, right? Say users already very familiar with a wallet IM token. If we can do a native integration with IM token, then users would be able to obtain fixed rates directly on IM token, but the trading or the locking of fixed yield happens on Pendle at the back. So users, they don't need to know what happens at the back. All that they need to know is that it's happening on an interface that they are familiar with, and that Pendle just do the rest of the work at the back. So yeah. Eh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, like these are various venues that we are exploring, so pretty excited about it. So I think the APY on Pendle is unlikely to go above like a 3 digit. Maybe 10-20% would be more reasonable. And I think the yields are generally sustainable because the products that we are currently listing on Pendle, they have already a proven track record of sustainable yields. So, for example, STETH, I think they will sustain for a long time. And then GLP, GDI. So these are assets with a pretty good historical data and track record of relatively stable APY. And um, in terms of the APYs, and because we allow for the stacking of yield, so I think it makes a lot of sense for users to consider Pendle as a venue to deposit these assets for additional yield. So yeah, I mean, on top of the rewards from the underlying protocols, there are like APYs from Pendle incentives as well. So that will make it more attractive as a venue. Now, as a result of that, I think that also brings about the risk consideration that you brought up. Um, with Pendle risk, the risk here is that the because sometimes because Pendle is building on top of other protocol, and at any one point in time, if in the worst of case, an unfortunate event like like a protocol compromisation happens, then the assets on Pendle will also potentially be affected. So the more the more layers there are, the worse the effect could be. Yeah. So yeah, if you, for example, if you deposit an asset like ETH into Lido, you only have one protocol to worry about. If you deposit onto Aura, your ETH onto Aura to have exposure on STETH, then you have um, Lido, and then Balancer, and then Aura. So that's three layers. Yeah. Any one of them gets exploited, then your asset might potentially be at risk.
Absolutely. And is this something that you consider when you're listing new pools? Do you have some kind of standards?
Sure. So for now, all the pools, all the assets, and all the pools that we set up, they have to be audited by someone that we have on retainer. And we only list the contracts that have been audited other than us. And then further down, I think one of the things that we want to do is to open up the protocol and make it more permissionless so that we can also kind of delegate the risk assessment to the community as well. Currently, we are the gatekeeper, but it's a lot of responsibility, and we eventually become the bottleneck because there are so many different assets, but we can't be supporting all of them. So the longer term vision for Pendle is actually like Uniswap, where you can set up pools permissionlessly, and then you can, yeah, anyone can set up pools. Just indicate the parameters, deposit asset, and then they're good to go.
So this is the direction that you would like Pendle to take, is to become more permissionless in the setup of pools.
Yes.
One of
Yeah.
the I had the first episode with Mark from Bancor, and we talked about DAOs, and he mentioned that not all protocols need a DAO, and you should really consider if having a DAO is something good for you or not. And especially in the early days, having a DAO might actually add a lot of overhead. So it seems that your actions are actually confirming that, is that first you start with maybe more kind of a centralized where you actually control what goes on the protocol, what's listed, etc. And then as the protocol is gaining adoption, users, and you introduce more and more decentralization and permissionless aspects to the protocol. Can you confirm?
Yeah, I think like from our perspective, we think this is the more reasonable step for us to take because one, yield trading is a fairly new concept. So if we were to decentralize the protocol too soon, we think it's going to be a lot more difficult for any kind of adoption to take place because no one's going to set the direction and the ecosystem is not mature enough. So we think it's important for us to provide the guidance and set a direction that us, the team, collectively can work towards. But what we do along the way is to gradually make it more decentralized. So we have actually allowed for voting to take place through VE Pendle, right? So the voting of incentives to the various pools on Pendle, that involves some form of soft governance. So over time, as people become more familiar with how things work on Pendle, then we can gradually open up the scope of participation from the community, and then we can allow for voting of proposals further down.
I'm curious about your thoughts about treasuries and treasury management. A lot of protocols have a lot of ETH on their balance because it's a blue chip asset and you want to have it. Now, with the introduction of LSTs, there are new discussions to say that it's really not worth have just ETH, better have staked ETH to to get the yield. And now there is Pendle who is proposing some kind of boosted APY on top of that, which is now you have already the reputation of being, a protocol. You've been around since 2021. Are you in discussions with protocols? Are they? Do you know if some protocols are using Pendle as kind of in their treasuries? Is this something that you do? Like I don't know, for example, you have a stable coin, pool, and do you use that as part of your treasury management strategy?
Sure. So I generally agree with the sentiment, and we've also been actively involved in discussions to onboard other protocol DAOs to deposit into Pendle. So one of the largest deposits from a protocol is actually Claros. So they've been around. They've also indicated that they have deposited some north of 1.8 to $2 million of funds into Pendle for treasury management. And then beyond that, I'm aware that there are a few other protocols that have also deposited assets into Pendle. So yes, this is a very viable direction that we should pursue as a protocol, just given the fact that so many different protocols out there hold ETH, and having a venue for these protocols to lock in the rates would make a lot of sense from a protocol perspective. Protocol treasury management perspective.
We discussed about ecosystems, about narratives, and how they can strengthen a protocol. Pendle V1 launched on the mainnet, but now you're on Arbitrum, and more recently also on the BNB chain. I want to focus on the Arbitrum first. I don't know if you have more TVL on Arbitrum or on mainnet now, but I would like to know, all things being equal, what part of the success of Pendle you would attribute to being on Arbitrum? Because Arbitrum was kind of narrative in 2023. Its TVL grew, and I know that there is a very friendly and rich ecosystem and protocols, collaborating with
Yeah,
each other. What part of how important is it to be on the right chain?
I think being on the right chain actually matters a lot. So from TVL growth perspective, being on the right chain means that we're able to absorb more liquidity because the chain is doing such a good job in attracting capital inflow. So we became the beneficiary of the additional liquidity that got into the ecosystem. So yeah, just by being on the right chain with the right narrative and the support from the right group of people, we we saw a lot of improvement on the traction for TVL and trading volume. And of course, I think being on Arbitrum, because they have assets like GMX and GDAI, GLP GDAI, we are able to offer a newer kind of asset to our users. So we haven't actually supported any kind of perpetual like swap LP tokens before GLP. And just given the interest in GLP and the liquidity on the protocol, we also saw a lot of interest. So now every week when the rate refreshes in the early part of the week, we see surge in activity because yeah, users would express views on like GLP's APY every week.
So there are also some other layer two chains that are pretty popular. For example, Polygon and Optimism, and especially Optimism has also seen its TVL grown, not as much as Arbitrum, but still. Um, but you went actually and more recently on the BNB chain. What are some of your considerations to take such decisions? And yeah.
Sure. So, in terms of the chain assessment, we are because Pendle is a second order derivative, most of the time we just need to wait and see what makes sense to us. And usually, uh, the way we look at chain expansion is number one, are there primitives on the chain? Because in the absence of primitives like, say, AMM or money market, it wouldn't make sense to have Pendle because there isn't yield. Yield aggregator is also another very important player that need to exist on an ecosystem before Pendle could make sense. So that's one. And then, if assuming that the primitives are already in place, is the TVL across the chain good enough for us to establish an implementation there? So, for example, if the chain has more than $1 billion in TVL, even if we capture 10% of it, it would still be a good amount of money. So it would be worthwhile of our effort and resources to implement on the chain. Versus, let's say, if a chain only has $10 million in TVL, even if we capture 10% of it, it will only be, say, $1 million in TVL for us, right? So with regards to the choice in BNB, it's because BNB already has the primitives in place and the TVL is very, very healthy on BNB chain. So just getting onto BNB chain, we think it makes a lot of sense for us. And we're generally very excited about establishing yield markets on, yeah, just bringing the yield trading opportunities to the BNB ecosystem.
In 2023, it seems that most of the protocols, at least main protocols, are going multi-chain. Uniswap is already on multiple chains, Compound and all that as well. Usually they are on Ethereum, some layer twos, Polygon, Arbitrum. Trader Joe also has recently been expanding. Do you think that in 2023, staying on a single chain is no more a viable strategy? For example, it's just being on the mainnet, and it's something that protocols should actively seek on, developing and going on other chains and being multi-chain.
I think it really depends on the nature of the product. Like, for example, our product, I think it makes sense to actually explore opportunities outside of Ethereum because we encourage trading activity on the venue, and trading activity is most is highest when the gas consideration is minimal. So if we were to just stay on Ethereum, it's going to be quite difficult for us to see more traction. And whereas, like, if we were to have implementation on multiple L1s or L2s where gas is not as significant a consideration, then we have a better chance in establishing ourselves as the de facto yield trading venue. So, yeah, so for example, like for, let's say, a NFT product, probably it kind of just makes sense to stay on Ethereum because that's where the liquidity and users are. So I think I think it really depends on the nature of the product.
Let's talk more about DeFi in general. There is first thing, there is this notion that I like to call Dapp Factories, and this is actually dApps starting with maybe one vertical, doing one specific thing, and then expanding to others. I can think of Frax, which is now, they have the stable coin, maybe that's their core business, and now they have a lending activity. They have their LSD. Kyber is doing the same thing. They started with the DEX. Now they have also farming pools, and they have recently developed this AI tool, kind of analytics. What is your take on that? And do you think that protocols that achieve some level of success should actively try to increase verticals again as kind of a growth user acquisition? And is also Pendle considering something like this?
I think in general it makes sense, but at the moment we're not really considering expanding beyond yield trading. That is our core focus, and we think there's a lot more that we need to do. And until we get to the point where the market is very, very saturated, I doubt we will be expanding into too many different product fronts. So yeah, coming back to the first question, I am of the opinion that when a product is sufficiently large, then the only way to differentiate itself is to offer more product features and offerings to the same group of users in the hope that these features can retain the users. Because otherwise, if you're sufficiently big, but you don't cater to different needs of users, then the user will have to shuffle between your product and someone else's product to achieve maybe like different purposes. So from a retention standpoint, I think it helps to have more features just to keep the user in place.
So combining that with the previous questions, can we say that maybe a user acquisition strategy could be to go on multiple chains and writing narratives and ecosystems, and then a more user retention strategy could be to, once that you have that established and then you have your users, to decrease your churn rate or to improve the offerings, add verticals on the services that you have so that people can just do whatever they need using your protocol.
Yeah, it's a tough question, but I think I'm of the opinion that we should all stick with our core. It's okay to have extended product features, but we shouldn't deviate too much from the core.
I would like to know what are some of the DeFi protocols that inspire you, that you take like some learnings from them, or that you like that how they went through some hard phases, or in terms of innovations, or in terms of the teams, what they're achieving, etc.
Yeah, so I think the first to mind is actually Uniswap. A lot of learnings there. Uniswap is the gold standard for AMM. They continue to innovate, and I hope that we can learn from their experience as protocol operator and keep coming out with products that make sense to users. Because even though we haven't seen the full scale of the V4, but just from what I know, based on what's already published, it represents a significant potential that could open up like new opportunities within the crypto sector. So Uniswap uh, is something that I is a protocol that I personally look up to, and then Curve as well, because I think Curve is a very interesting one, especially not just the way they design the AMM, but also how an ecosystem can be constructed through having that VE mechanics. Um, yeah, so um, convex yearn they're building on top of Curve, making Curve quite an indispensable part to the entire crypto DeFi. I guess like top of mind, these two are the ones that I learned most from.
I was really surprised yesterday with the announcement of the Uniswap X in the Paris conference. I don't know if you followed, but they announced this Uniswap X, and this comes actually very, very just in a short amount after Uniswap V4, which was announced maybe 1 or 2 months ago, and which on its own was a big kind of a big announcement and a lot of changes. But now they have recently announced Uniswap X, which is also a big thing, and so yes, they're constantly innovating and bringing new ideas. Very inspiring, of course. Now,
Yeah.
I would like to. So, Pendle V1, you raised actually a seed round in 2021. Let's talk about VCs, and I would like to know your opinion now based on what you had in 2021, V1. Now, V2 was kind of maybe bootstrapped, and based on also what you see on other projects, do you think that having like raising with VCs is indispensable in crypto to make to have success, or can projects still bootstrap? With launching a maybe a token or free launch and still be
Yeah.
successful. What is your take on that?
I think protocols can certainly be successful even without VCs, but I think having VCs on their side would make the job a bit easier. Not to say that it will be a whole lot easier because starting a project is always difficult, but it helps with legitimacy. So, for example, if we have like VC A, B, and C who are already very renowned investing in us, it helps to give the impression that we are more legitimate. And that means we can potentially attract more liquidity to the protocol, versus if we were to start from ground up and no support from anyone. It's a lot harder to start off without any kind of reputation. And of course, I think some VCs are more helpful than others. For example, if now that we are at a stage where we're looking to scale the product, having a VC with the experience in scaling a product and command respect and to be able to attract liquidity to our protocol, I think that is going to be a lot more value adding to our protocol. If yeah, just having them in on our site makes a lot of difference.
My last question is you have a lot of experience in DeFi, being involved since 2017 with Kyber. Yeah, you have seen a lot of different protocols succeeding or failing. Now you have a lot of few years of experience with Pendle. For other new founders, DeFi protocols, let's say that you want to start a new protocol from scratch. What are some of your takeaways, some of the lessons, some of the tips that you would share with others in that case?
I mean, not so much a tip, but I think if you ever want to start a business or a project, it's most important that you find the right people to do it. Because I think having the right people makes a lot of difference. As intuitive as it sounds, it's actually very difficult to achieve. I think I got very lucky to be able to come across people whom I can work with and people who are also very capable in the fields that they are operating in. So I would attribute 100% of the traction that we have seen so far to the people that we have in the team. So finding a right co-founder is extremely important because it sets the tone and the culture that decides how the team will be operated and pretty much the fate of the entire like project or business. Yeah. So bottom line is have high standards in looking out for people and make sure you find someone whom you can work with.
Thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Tien, for your time, that for sharing your knowledge and experience. That was a really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me and appreciate that you gave me the chance to share my experience.